Boston Common shimmered under a veil of fresh snow, its trees wrapped in twinkling lights that pulsed like stars against the New Year's Eve sky, while families glided across the frozen frog pond, their laughter mingling with the distant pop of early fireworks. Michael Carter, a 40-year-old tech CEO, sat alone on a frost-dusted bench, his charcoal coat pristine but unable to mask the weight in his posture, his sharp jawline softened by a grief that had shadowed him for 3 years since his sister Emily's death from leukemia. Her final plea, find joy, again haunted him as he stared at the bursts of gold and crimson in the sky, their fleeting brilliance unable to pierce the emptiness that had settled in his bones. His empire of wealth and innovation, built with relentless drive, offered no solace, only a stark reminder of the quiet evenings with Emily, planning adventures that never came to pass. He'd chosen this solitude, retreating from the world's warmth, until a small voice cut through the festive hum. "You look lonely, mister. Want to meet my mama? She makes everything better." Michael glanced down to find Sophie, a 4-year-old with a crooked knit cap, her blonde curls spilling out, clutching a crumbling cookie in mittened hands, her hazel eyes glowing with a sincerity that disarmed him. Her coat was too thin for the biting cold, but her smile radiated a warmth that seemed to defy the winter night. Surprised, Michael let out a soft laugh, a sound foreign to his lips, and asked her name. "Sophie," she replied, crumbs dusting her scarf as she pointed toward a dimly lit corner of the park. "Mama's there. She's so pretty, but she works hard." Across the snowy path, Clara knelt by a trash can, her movements deliberate as she sorted through discarded bottles, her dark hair catching the glow of a nearby lamppost, lending her an almost ethereal grace despite her worn jacket. Michael's heart stirred, not with pity, but with a quiet respect for the dignity she carried in such a moment. Sophie tugged his sleeve, her fingers chilled but firm, insisting, "Come on, she'll like you. You need a friend, I can tell." Drawn by her unyielding kindness, Michael rose, letting her guide him through the park's revelry, past children tossing snowballs and couples sharing steaming drinks. Clara looked up as they approached, her eyes narrowing with protective instinct. As she called Sophie, "You know better than to wander." Her voice was firm yet gentle, softening as she took in Michael's polished appearance, his hesitant smile. He raised a hand, disarming, and said, "She's no trouble. She saw I was alone and thought I needed company. She wasn't wrong." Clara pulled Sophie close, her gaze cautious but easing as Sophie beamed, unbothered by the tension. "I'm Michael," he said, meeting Clara's eyes, which held both exhaustion and resilience. "There's a vendor nearby with hot cider. Let me get you both something warm. It's freezing out here." Clara's lips parted, her pride wrestling with Sophie's eager nod, and after a moment she agreed, just for her, 1 cup. They walked toward the cart, its steam curling into the air, Sophie skipping between them, her chatter about the sparkly lights filling the silence. Michael watched Clara, her steps measured, always a shield for her daughter, and felt a spark ignite within him, not a grand epiphany, but a subtle shift, like the first note of a song he'd forgotten. As Sophie clutched her cider, her eyes wide with delight, Michael caught Clara's profile in the glow of the park's lights, her strength a quiet force that made him wonder if this chance encounter, born of a child's simple compassion, might be the start of something he hadn't dared hope for, a way back to the joy Emily had wanted for him. The vendor cart glowed like a beacon in the snowy expanse of Boston Common, its steam rising in delicate spirals, carrying the rich scent of mulled cider as families laughed and twirled sparklers under the New Year's Eve sky. Michael Carter stood beside Clara and Sophie, handing Sophie a steaming cup that she cradled with both hands, her mittens damp from the snow, her face lighting up with a grin that warmed him more than the drink ever could. Clara lingered a step behind, her dark eyes wary, scanning the crowd as if braced for judgment. Her fingers curled tightly around her own cup, though she hadn't taken a sip. Michael sensed the wall she'd built, a shield forged from years of struggle, and he kept his voice gentle, asking if they'd like to sit on a nearby bench draped in fairy lights. Sophie nodded eagerly, tugging Clara along, and they settled. The little girl nestled between them, her chatter about the dancing snowflakes easing the tension. Clara's shoulders relaxed slightly, and when Michael asked how long they'd been in the city, her voice was soft, almost lost in the parks. Admitting they drifted through shelters for years, ever since Sophie's birth upended her life. Her words were measured, revealing only fragments, a dream of teaching abandoned when survival took precedence. But Michael heard the weight behind them, a life reshaped by necessity. His own heart tugged, pulling him back to Emily's hospital. Her frail hand squeezing his as she urged him to live beyond his grief. A promise he'd failed to keep, burying himself in boardrooms instead. Sophie, oblivious to the heaviness, pointed at a firework blooming red above, squealing, "It's like a flower." And Michael found himself smiling, a reflex that felt both foreign and right. Clara watched her daughter, her expression softening. And when Michael asked about her teaching dreams, she shrugged, her voice tinged with resignation. Books and chalkboards don't pay for diapers. The honesty struck him, mirroring Emily's blunt courage. And he felt a pull to know more, to understand the woman who carried such strength in silence. Sophie yawned, her head drooping against Clara's arm, and Clara reached into her warm bag, pulling out a small dog-eared journal. She opened it to a handwritten page and began reading a story about a girl who befriended a lost wolf under a starry sky, her voice weaving a world of wonder that held Sophie spellbound and drew Michael in, his own worries fading as he listened. The tale was simple, but Clara's delivery soft, deliberate. Alive made it feel like a gift, crafted from nothing but love. When a man in tattered layers paused nearby, his eyes on Sophie's uneaten muffin, Clara didn't hesitate. She stood, retrieved a wrapped apple from her bag, and handed it to him with a quiet, "Stay warm." The man nodded, shuffling off, and Michael sat stunned, struck by her instinct to give when she had so little, a generosity he'd rarely seen in his world of calculated charity. It echoed Emily's habit of sharing her hospital snacks with nurses, her laughter defying her pain, and Michael felt his guarded heart crack further. As Sophie's eyes grew heavy, Clara lifted her gently, and Michael offered to walk them to their shelter, a squat building at the park's edge, its windows dim against a festive glow. Clara hesitated, her pride a quiet force, but agreed, her steps steady despite the weight of her daughter in her arms. The snow fell thicker now, dusting their coats, and Michael walked beside them, the silence comfortable, broken only by Sophie's sleepy hum. At the shelter's door, Clara turned, her eyes meeting his, and said, "Thank you for tonight." It meant something to her. Michael nodded, his throat tight, and as Sophie mumbled, "See you, mister," he felt a resolve settle in him, not to save them, but to be part of their world, to share in their light. He stood in the snow as the door closed, the park's laughter fading behind him, and for the first time since Emily's death, he felt anchored, as if Clara's story of the wolf and the girl had woven him into something larger, something alive. The lights twinkled in the distance, and Michael walked back to his car, the warmth of their moment lingering, a quiet promise that he'd return, not as a stranger, but as someone who belonged. The dawn after New Year's Eve broke cold and gray over Boston, the common blanketed in snow, its festive lights now pale in the morning light. As Michael Carter navigated the icy sidewalk to the shelter where Clara and Sophie stayed, his arms were heavy with a canvas bag filled with children's books and a bundle of warm scarves. His mind restless with the memory of Sophie's bright eyes and Clara's quiet resilience, a stark contrast to the sterile boardrooms that had defined his life since Emily's death. Inside the shelter, the air was thick with the smell of instant coffee and the murmur of tired voices. And Clara met him at the entrance, her dark hair pulled back, her expression a mix of surprise and guarded curiosity as Sophie darted forward, her face lighting up at the sight of the gifts. Michael handed Sophie a book about a fox who outsmarted a storm, and she clutched it, chattering about the pictures, while Clara's fingers lingered on a soft blue scarf, her eyes betraying a flicker of warmth before her usual caution returned. Over lukewarm tea in the shelter's crowded lounge, Michael learned their stay was precarious, the shelter overbooked and threatening to turn them out, a fact Clara shared with a forced calm that didn't hide the worry in her voice. He suggested a week at a nearby motel, a simple place with clean sheets and a small stove, framing it as a chance for Sophie to have a real bed. But Clara's gaze hardened, her pride a wall he hadn't expected. "We've managed," she said, her tone sharp, though her eyes softened when Sophie hugged the scarf to her cheek. After a long silence, she nodded, saying, "For her, okay," her voice low but resolute. At the motel, the room was modest but warm, its yellow walls glowing under a single lamp, and Sophie's squeal as she flopped onto the bed echoed like a melody, stirring something deep in Michael's chest, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Emily's last days. Clara unpacked their sparse belongings, her movements precise, almost ritualistic, and when Sophie danced around in her new scarf, Clara's smile was small but unguarded, a rare glimpse of joy. Over a shared plate of crackers and cheese from the shelter's pantry, Clara opened up, her voice soft as she spoke of Sophie's father, a man who vanished when she was pregnant, leaving her to face a world that seemed to shrink with every closed door. Michael shared his own loss, how Emily's leukemia had stripped away his sense of home, how he'd poured himself into work to escape the ache, only to find it followed him. Clara listened, her eyes steady, and when she said, "You're still fighting for something," Michael felt a crack in the armor he'd worn for years, her words echoing Emily's hope for him. Noticing a community college poster taped to the motel's front desk, it mentioned a teaching program, suggesting Clara could reclaim her dream, but she shook her head, citing the cost and time, a voice heavy with doubt. Michael offered to pay the tuition, framing it as an investment in Sophie's future, and Clara's eyes searched his, torn between hope and fear of charity. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely audible, but her gaze held a spark of possibility. As Sophie colored a picture of a house with 3 windows, one for each of them, Michael watched, his heart swelling with a quiet resolve to be more than a fleeting helper. Clara tucked Sophie in, her hand smoothing the girl's curls as she whispered a story about a bird who rebuilt its nest after a storm, and Michael stood by the door, the scene etching itself into his mind. Leaving the motel, he stepped into the snowy night, the air sharp, but the weight of his grief lighter, replaced by a determination to walk beside them, not to fix their lives, but to share in their journey. The commons lights glowed faintly in the distance, and Michael clutched Sophie's drawing, a simple sketch of 3 stick figures holding hands, feeling for the first time in years that he might belong somewhere again, not as a savior, but as a friend. The Boston winter deepened, its icy breath frosting the windows of the community college where Clara attended her evening classes, her face alight with a quiet fire as she scribbled notes on teaching methods, her dream of a classroom taking shape. With every lecture, Michael sat with Sophie in a nearby public library, its warm glow a haven as they pieced together a puzzle of a starry sky, her giggles filling the air when a piece clicked into place, her small hand patting his with trust. That made his heart ache in a way he hadn't felt since Emily's laughter filled their childhood home. Their routine had settled like snow over the past weeks. Clara studied 3 nights a week, her determination a steady pulse, while Michael took Sophie to aquariums or read her tales of adventurous rabbits, his once empty evenings now alive with her chatter and crayon scribbles. Clara had taken a job as a part-time clerk at Michael's smallest office, a cozy space where she organized files with precision, her pride evident in every task she completed, refusing to be seen as less than capable. One crisp afternoon, they visited a botanical garden, Sophie marveling at a greenhouse bursting with orchids, asking if flowers could talk, and Michael, kneeling beside her, spun a story of a rose that whispered secrets to the moon, his voice soft as he saw Emily's curiosity mirrored in her eyes. Clara's progress was steady. She'd earned high marks on her first essay, her confidence growing like a seedling breaking through frost. But a shadow fell when she overheard a coworker murmur about Michael's pet project, the words sharp as thorns, cutting into her sense of self. She stood in the office hallway, her jaw tight, but Michael caught the hurt in her eyes and confronted the coworker, his voice firm. She's here because she's earned it, not because of me. Clara's nod was subtle, but her gaze held a new layer of trust, a bridge strengthening between them. One evening, Michael invited them to his brownstone, its sleek lines softened by Sophie's stuffed toys scattered on the couch, and they cooked tacos together, Sophie standing on a chair to sprinkle cheese, her laughter mixing with the sizzle of the pan. After Sophie dozed off, curled under a blanket with a book of fairy tales, Michael and Clara sat at the dining table, her notes spread out, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She spoke of her fear that her past mistakes trusting the wrong people, losing her way might shadow Sophie's future, and Michael confessed his own dread, how he'd locked away his grief for Emily, afraid that living fully would betray her memory. Their words flowed easily, unguarded, touching on dreams. Clara pictured a classroom where kids felt safe to grow, while Michael admitted he longed for a life with meaning beyond profit. The air hummed with a quiet connection, her hand grazing his as she handed him a mug of tea, the touch lingering, warm and unspoken. Clara read aloud a story she'd written for Sophie, about a girl who taught a forest to sing, and Michael listened, captivated by her ability to weave hope from hardship, her voice a steady anchor. As they walked back to the motel, Sophie sleepy, in Clara's arms, the city sparkled with early March frost, and Michael felt a peace settle over him, a sense that these moments of shared laughter and quiet truths was what Emily had meant by joy. At the motel's door, Clara thanked him, her voice soft but sure, and Sophie stirred, murmuring, "You're fun, Mike," her words a small gift he carried home. In his car, the silence was no longer heavy but alive with possibility, Clara's strength, and Sophie's trust weaving into his life like threads of a new tapestry. He glanced at Sophie's latest drawing, taped to his dashboard, 3 figures under a crescent moon, and realized he wasn't just helping them. He was finding his way back to himself, step by gentle step, in the glow of their shared warmth. The city's lights blurred past, and Michael knew he was falling for Clara, not for her need, but for her heart, her fight, the way she made the world brighter despite its weight. The late March wind howled through Boston's narrow streets, rattling the motel room's thin windows as Clara sat by Sophie's bedside, her hand steady on her daughter's feverish brow, the soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminating a scattering of cough syrup bottles and crumpled tissues. Sophie's small frame shivered under a warm quilt, her cough sharp and persistent, each one tightening Clara's jaw as she adjusted a damp cloth, her open textbook forgotten on a nearby chair, its pages marked with frantic notes for an upcoming exam. Michael had grown accustomed to their evening rhythm, Clara's texts after class, sometimes with a snapshot of Sophie's latest sketch or a question about lesson plans. But tonight, his phone stayed silent, and by 8:30 p.m., a knot of worry drove him across town, the city's wet pavement reflecting neon lights as he parked outside the motel. He knocked, the sound sharp against the quiet, and when Clara opened the door, her hair was loose, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her voice barely above a whisper as she said, "You didn't need to come." Behind her, Sophie lay curled on the bed, her cheeks flushed, a thermometer resting beside a half-empty cup of water, and Michael's heart clenched at the sight, the memory of Emily's hospital bed flashing unbidden in his mind. He stepped inside, asking if Sophie had seen a doctor, and Clara nodded, explaining a clinic visit confirmed a bad cold, the fever stubborn but manageable, though her hand shook slightly as she smoothed Sophie's blanket. Michael noticed a textbook, its margins filled with Clara's neat handwriting, and asked why she was still studying with Sophie so ill. "The exam's in 2 days," she said, her tone edged with defiance. "I can't let her down by failing." Her words carried a weight Michael understood. The fear of not being enough, a fear he'd carried since Emily's illness, when all his wealth couldn't stop her fading. He sat on a rickety chair, his voice soft as he shared how he'd thrown himself into work to numb the guilt of losing her, believing he should have done more. Clara's eyes met his, her guard lowering, and she admitted her own guilt. How every cough Sophie let out felt like a reminder of the life she couldn't yet provide: shelters, uncertainty, a mother stretched too thin. Their shared confessions hung in the air, raw and unguarded, binding them in a way words alone couldn't. Michael offered to stay, and though Clara's instinct was to refuse, her shoulders sagged, and she nodded, too weary to argue. He pulled a chair beside Sophie's bed, reading her a story about a turtle who carried its home through a storm, his voice steady as Sophie's eyelids fluttered, her breathing easing slightly. Clara sat across from him, reviewing flashcards, her focus fierce despite the circles under her eyes. And when Michael quizzed her on teaching theories, her correct answers sparked a tired but triumphant smile. By dawn, Sophie's fever had dipped, her cough softer, and Clara's relief was a quiet wave, though she insisted on heading to class later, determined not to falter. Michael stayed, coloring with Sophie as she perked up, her giggles returning, as she drew a son with a winking face. Days later, Clara texted him, passed the exam, with a photo of Sophie holding a crayon star, and Michael felt a surge of pride, not for solving their problems, but for being part of their fight. That evening, he visited the motel, finding Sophie sketching happily, and he spoke quietly to Clara, his voice steady. "You and Sophie, you're not a cause to me. You're home." Clara's breath caught, her eyes searching his, and she whispered, "I'm learning to trust that, but it's slow." He nodded, respecting her pace, and they sat together, Sophie's laughter filling the space as she showed them her drawing of 3 figures under a rainbow. Michael held it, his chest tight with a realization that had been building for weeks. He loved Clara, not for her struggles, but for her unwavering heart, her refusal to break, the way she made every moment matter. As he left the motel's sign buzzed faintly, the night air sharp with the promise of spring, and Michael drove home, Sophie's drawing tucked in his coat, a reminder that love wasn't about fixing someone, it was about standing beside them, sharing their light, and finding your own in the process. Snowflakes swirled gently outside Michael Carter's brownstone, catching the golden glow of Boston's streetlights as New Year's Eve settled over the city, the air alive with distant carols and the hum of anticipation. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the scent of roasting garlic and the clatter of plates as Clara set the table, her pale blue teacher's badge pinned proudly to her sweater, earned through months of relentless study and unshakable will. Sophie twirled in a sparkly purple dress, her laughter bouncing off the walls as she waved a handmade card covered in glitter and crayon hearts, proclaiming, "Our best New Year's ever." Michael stood in the doorway, his heart full as he watched then transform his once quiet home into a place of life and color. Sophie's drawings taped to the fridge, Clara's textbooks neatly stacked on a shelf. Clara had graduated and now taught at a local elementary school, her classroom a haven for kids like Sophie, her lessons infused with the same gentle magic she'd once spun in tattered notebooks. Over dinner pasta with too much sauce and a chocolate cake Sophie had decorated with a chaotic sprinkle of stars, they shared stories of the year. Clara laughing about a student who'd gifted her a paper crown, Sophie recounting her first school play where she'd played a talking tree. Michael listened, his eyes tracing Clara's face. Her confidence, a quiet radiance that made his chest ache with a love he'd only recently dared to name. After dinner, they moved to the living room, where a small fireplace cast flickering shadows, and Sophie nestled into Michael's side, a blanket draped over her as she yawned, clutching a stuffed bear. Clara lit candles on the windowsill, their soft glow framing her as she gazed at the falling snow, and Michael joined her, his hand brushing hers, the touch electric yet tender. He spoke softly, his voice steady with truth. You didn't just give Sophie a future, you gave me one too. Clara's eyes shimmered, and she placed a hand on his chest. Her fingers warmed through his shirt, saying, "We found each other, didn't we?" The words carried the weight of their journey, from a chance meeting in the park to this moment of unspoken vows. Michael leaned in, kissing her gently, the world fading until Sophie's giggle broke the silence. Yuck, kissing, followed by a burst of laughter that pulled them all into a shared, joyous grin. As the TV counted down the final seconds of the year, they huddled on the couch, Sophie tossing bits of confetti she'd made from shredded paper, shouting, 10, 9, 8, with uncontainable excitement. Michael pulled Clara close, his arm around her, Sophie tucked against his other side, and when the first firework bloomed in silver and blue over the city, Sophie cheered, "Happy New Year!" Clara looked at Michael, her voice a whisper, ready for, "What's next?" He smiled, his heart lighter than it had been since Emily's last days, and said, "I've got my beginning right here." The room felt like a sanctuary, not of perfection, but of presence, Clara's strength, Sophie's joy, his own rediscovered hope, weaving a bond stronger than any he'd known. Michael handed Sophie a small book he'd made, filled with Clara's stories, each page a testament to their shared path, and Sophie clutched it, promising to read it every night. Outside, the snow fell thicker, blanketing the world in quiet, but inside, their laughter rang clear, a melody of second chances and love that needed no grand gestures, only the courage to show up, to stay, to believe. As the fireworks painted the sky, Michael knew this wasn't just a new year, it was a new life, built on the small, sacred moments that had led them here, from a cold park bench to a home filled with warmth and the promise of tomorrow.